Hello, I'm Leroy Garcia, and this is Blue Rain Gallery Podcast. Today we're interviewing one of my best friends and our executive director of Blue Rain Gallery, and Denise Phetteplace. This is her second time on podcasts. You can visit the first podcast we did on episode 35 by going to our website, blueraingallery.com, scrolling under podcast. Denise had an idea a few years ago to present to our artists a study of the Taos founders of art, the Taos Art Society, excuse me. And we've covered a few: Sharp, Couse, Berninghaus, and now we're covering Herbert Dunton. I've had Denise come here because she's a student of these painters and has done a lot of research, and would like her to tell us a little bit of background story of Herbert Dunton. These folks came to Taos around the early 1900s and have a major impact here. So tell us a little bit about Herbert.
So W. Herbert Dunton was born near Augusta, Maine in the late 1880s. He was raised on his grandparents' farm in Newport, Rhode Island, and he developed an early appreciation for the outdoors. He did a lot of hunting with his grandfather, loved to draw as a child, and just had a real appreciation for the natural world. Dunton didn't care much for school. I believe he dropped out officially at the age of 16. He eventually moved to Montana after working a series of odd jobs. He moved to Montana, or visited Montana for the first time shortly thereafter, around the age of 18. And that's really where he fell in love with the West. He spent some time cowboying, working as a ranch hand, and that pretty much cemented the fact that the West was where he was meant to be. He, as I said, was drawing as a young boy, and continued to draw as a young man, and illustrated some drawings early on that he submitted to magazines back east, and they were published. He had illustrations published in Scribner's and Harper's and Collier's, and I believe he even illustrated a series of books. He eventually attended art school at the Cowles Art School in Boston, and then later received further education at the Art Students League in New York. And that's where he met Ernest Blumenschein, and that was his connection to Taos. So upon Ernest Blumenschein's recommendation, Dunton moved to Taos, and it turns out that was exactly where he needed to be. He officially moved to Taos in 1912 and helped to establish the Taos Society of Artists in 1915.
He was part of the starting group. One thing I read about him that actually my daughter constructed a little bio, but one thing that was very interested in is his notation of different types of species of cactus and light. And I mean, he just paid attention to everything. He was very detail oriented. But I think a lot of these folks, when they moved to Taos, these early artists, that's one of the things they fell in love with, not just the heritage of the native peoples or the Mexican Americans at the time, but it was actually the aesthetic with light, the beautiful mountains, everything. What specifically do you like about Mr. Dunton's work?
I love how he portrays the land. I really enjoy his paintings of lone cowboys and hunters, large game. I guess he just had a real appreciation for the outdoors, for hunting and camping, and for cattle country, and that really came through in his work. Unlike some of the other Taos founding artists. He dealt a little bit less with the native cultures that were present in the region and focused more on the land and working the land. And so, I really resonate with that.
In constructing these shows, what type of direction are you giving our artists and giving them assignment as far as like, hey, let's study Dunton? Are you giving them any ideas, or are they coming up with this stuff on their own?
Well, it's really them. I mean, the only real parameters I'm giving them are basically size parameters, and just asking them to choose one of the founding painters' original masterworks to use as creative inspiration for their own interpretation. It really is that loose. And strangely enough, we haven't had any artists overlap in terms of the paintings that they've chosen to.
They're all different.
To portray. Yeah, it just happened to work out that way. I really wanted them to just spend some time going over the works and finding what resonates personally with them, and just kind of let that happen organically.
Well, I thought something that we should do is maybe go over some of these paintings that we've received already. This show is very beautiful. Like Denise has said, everything is very distinct and different. And it's interesting, the paintings that these artists have chosen to inspire works from. Let's start with Dennis Siminsky. He used a painting from Mr. Dunton entitled October Gold. What do you like about that painting and how he interpreted it?
That particular piece just has a magical quality about it. Perhaps it's all of that gold foliage. It feels like it's just a dripping forest of gold. The cowboy and his horse, they're kind of dwarfed or enveloped by this kind of scene.
It kind of has a modernist feel to it with the way it's painted. I think also, if anybody's been in Taos in the fall, along the Rio Grande, you have those cottonwoods that turn gold. And I think that's exactly what he's trying to interpret. But what I like different about this is his interaction with the horse. In the original painting, you see a man kind of hidden in the sagebrush a little bit, right? And in this painting, it's a full horse and rider figure kind of in the same setting. But it's interesting how he incorporated just a little bit, changed it up and made it his own. And I thought that was pretty cool. Catherine Stedham. Let's talk about the one she chose. This is The Horse Rustler by Herbert Dunton. Tell me a little bit about her painting. What's different or unusual about it?
Well, Catherine has elected to replace the man on horseback with a woman on horseback, and it happens to be a self-portrait, so she's inserted herself and her horse in the painting. I think she overall honored the original composition, but just added some attributes of her own painting style, which come through nicely. I love how developed the foreground is, and love the way the figure and the horse are both set off by that kind of big blue sky that we're so fortunate to have here.
Yeah, I think it's what I like about it is it's pushed Catherine, and Catherine really enjoys being pushed a little bit. Most of Catherine's stuff is landscape oriented, so to get any type of figurative, that's also very unusual. But that's the inspiration that we're looking for. We want people to be inspired, and then to create their own voice, and she really did that well. This is a great one, following the tracks, it's called. And this is a piece that inspired Robin Jones. And Robin Jones is one of our really fast-growing artists. And she normally paints on aluminum. And I'll let Denise tell you a little bit more about Robin Jones and then talk about the painting.
Sure. Robin focuses mainly on portraiture. She tends to merge portraits of female youth with animals. Some animals that are endangered, others not. In general, she is focusing mostly on female youth, and she's really taken that painting and owned it. I think it truly feels as though it could be a Robin Jones painting without any sort of exterior or outside influence. I love the way she's brought dynamic color to the composition. I love the harmony between the young girl and the horse that she's leading. It's very dear.
It is. It's a really beautiful painting. The title of her painting is "Do Not Fear the Path," and instead of the quarter horse or whatever on the original painting, it's more like a Clydesdale. This little girl's leading through the bush. Back in the day in Taos, around that time, they used big horses to plow the lands or to bring the logs down from the mountains or plant the trees. So that's not an uncommon type of horse. Let's talk about Matthew Sievers. And this is also an unusual piece for Matthew. Matthew usually does landscapes. He does figurative paintings every now and then. But in Matthew's work, he normally does not use any brushes in his paintings. It's usually he's scraping paint with rubbers or squeegees or rollers or anything he can do. What do you like about that painting?
Well, I think it's a sort of excellent example of a Dunton painting that really honors the sort of cultural landscape amongst ranching. Or for ranching in the West. A lot of Dunton's work portrayed or helped perpetuate this idea that the West was full of open, unfettered terrain. It was rugged and isolated, and there was this sort of promise of having this opportunity to work the land and have some sort of stake or claim in the land. And I feel as though Matthew picked a piece that just helped actually illustrate that in a good way. Matthew, I feel like, stayed fairly close to the original in terms of his own interpretation. It's a little more vibrant in terms of the palette. We see a little bit more happening in terms of the brushwork, and part of that is because of Matthew's exuberant style in general. But I think it's just a really nice example of a typical Dunton painting.
Yeah, he came pretty close, but he did leave his mark in a different way, especially the sky, but it's more vibrant by far. Okay, so we just did a podcast with Rosita Santiago, and we invited her to be part of this show too. And she picked a painting called Vivian on Pet. And boy, she really nailed it with a Rosita style, didn't she? What can you say about this style?
Well, I think that Rosita's adaptation of Dunton's original is really beautiful. She definitely played with light and in terms of creating a mood or an ambiance in the painting. I love how it has that sort of darker feel about it. It almost feels like, nighttime illuminated. The fact that she incorporated figures in blankets, native figures in blankets, that's very typical of Rosita's work. So to bring those elements in feels very fitting. I also just love this painting in general, Dunton's original and Rosita's interpretation. Vivian was Dunton's daughter, competent horsewoman, and as you would expect his daughter to be. And she looks right at home on her horse.
She does, huh? But I really like the two native figures in the foreground. And growing up in Taos, that was a pretty common sight when I was younger. And the Taos Pueblo people would go buy what we called penny blankets, but they'd go to J.C. Penney's and buy these flannel blankets, and they wrap them, and that's very traditional in Taos. You'll see that in ceremonies and stuff. But she's incorporated like the past, present, and future in a way somehow in this construct. It's very beautiful. Mm-hmm.
And that really, it really was, I think, a challenge for our artists to figure out a way to breathe new life into some of these historic works. And so someone like Rosita really picked up on that opportunity.
Yeah. The next piece we're going to study is called Timberlane, and it's a painting that Mr. Dunton did in 1932, and it's of a black bear, which is very typical in the Taos surrounding areas. Nathan Bennett chose to do this one. For those of you who don't know Nathan's work, he is one of the premier patina artists of our time. He produces work on bronze panels and on aluminum panels, but through patina. And so the process involves a blowtorch in one hand and acids and alkalines dipped in a brush and seared into the metal. And he does it with accuracy. And if you can imagine his style, it's more like a watercolor because you can't necessarily control lines. But he's become such an expert. He's controlling lines. What do you like about this painting?
Well, the subject itself, I guess, brings us back to Dunton's earlier years. He worked as an assistant to a bear trapper, I believe in Montana. And so it's not unusual to see him painting bears. They were a favorite subject of his as well. I love the fact that Nathan just got the amount of detail that he did in his interpretation. In fact, when I was reviewing the images side by side, I had to really look close to figure out which one was the original Dunton painting and which one was the patina. I mean, he just it's amazing how he's able to wield his medium.
Yeah, it doesn't bother me that the piece is very similar to the original because the medium is so fresh and different.
Exactly.
I mean, it's never been done like that.
Exactly. I mean, I think that Nathan, he's a realist, in most of what he does. And he really does strive for that kind of accuracy. But viewing his interpretation in person is very different than looking at the images on our website or looking at the images on that piece of paper that you have in front of you. There's just a luminosity to the work.
There is. And for those of you who'd like to understand a little bit what we were talking about, his process, you can go to our YouTube channel, and there's a process video on there of Nathan painting. Is it this actual painting? So you can see that. So after you view this podcast, go check that out. That's another fun opportunity. And this is one of my favorites. It was a photo of Herbert Dunton painting outdoors. And ZZ Wade just picked the black and white of Mr. Dunton. And tell me a little bit about this. Tell us a little bit about ZZ Wade, too.
Sure. Well, ZZ Wade's a painter based in the Pacific Northwest. He's been living in the States for over 30 years, originally from, I believe, Beijing, China. Excellent artist. And I really appreciate the bold color in his compositions, the undulation in the landscape, and I love the kind of simplicity in his figures. ZZ Wei is one of a few artists that took this challenge in a different direction in that, rather than picking a masterwork of Dunton's to adapt and reinterpret, he chose to work off of a photograph of Dunton himself, and it really is it really is excellent. I don't have much more to say about it other than it's a very graphic image. In fact, we chose to use it as the banner image for the show because it just has a lot of pull visually.
It's powerful. It's a great piece.
It is very powerful. And I love how the figure is so prominent, and the landscape, which is ordinarily so vast and expansive and would swallow one up, it's actually reversed in this situation. I
like the little hint of horse on the right side. You just kind of tuck that little head in there. He's fantastic. Zizi Wei also has a great personality, sense of humor, if you can get him. Let's talk about Jim Vogel's piece. He picked a painting called Pastor de Cabras. And in the early days when the Spanish first came through, they were mostly sheep herders. And so it's a very common type of painting in Taos, especially, maybe not with sheep, but, goats and stuff of that nature. And Jim always has a very interesting way of spinning stuff. What do you think about this painting?
Well, I think it's absolutely beautiful. It feels exactly like a Jim Vogel painting. If Jim were to come up with a painting on his own, without this Dunton challenge in place, I think that this is a composition that I would see him creating. So I like his decision to eliminate the sheep and
hence the title, right?
Yes,
Pastor sin Cabras,
and to insert his dog.
It's a self-portrait,
in the
isn't
painting.
It?
Yes. Well, I don't. Is that meant to be Jim?
I don't know.
It's meant to be his dog. I don't know if it's meant to be Jim.
We'll have to ask him.
We'll have to ask him.
Yeah.
But again. It's he took a slightly darker composition too of Dunton's, and he kind of brightened it up. It has a slightly different vibrancy about it. It's framed in Jim's typical manner, where he collaborates with his wife Kristen to create these unusual frames that are very befitting of the pieces from salvage material. I'm extremely pleased with what he's done.
Yeah, it's an old yoke and stuff. It looks also like this is a scene right out of his backyard that he recognized in Dixon. Perhaps we don't know, but it seems like that sandy hill that's in the background of Dixon with the cemetery underneath. Mm-hmm. All right. Let's go to Mrs. Aaron Courier.
So Aaron has elected each year to do a formal portrait of each of the founding members of the Taos Society of Artists. So she kind of stuck with that tradition here, and has portrayed Dunton sitting with his cat in his lap. I think it's an adorable painting.
It is cute.
Yeah, and she's incorporated elements that we see often in her work. For instance, like the radiating lines that come from behind the figure, often to portray or illustrate a mandala or a halo of sorts, and it's just very dynamic in terms of the colors she's using. She's incorporated a horse as well, because Dunton really couldn't be seen without a horse. I mean, he was a real horseman.
Mm-hmm. And the cat.
Yeah. Yes.
Can't forget the cat.
Yeah. She's just done, I think, a fabulous job of capturing him. And she's working off of a photograph that was, I'm sorry, you have the notes in front of you, but that was one that was
in 1932.
In 1932. And who was the photographer that shot that?
Will Connell.
Will Connell.
Yeah. No, it's great. I love the fact that like in Zizi's case, in her case, just taking a black and white of Mr. Dunn and They did great. I love the piece. It was great. Oh, one of my favorite paintings. Let's talk about Going In, the Bear Hunters. This is a painting that was done by Mr. Dunton in 1909. I love what Sean's done. And Sean has been a professional painter for many, many years. As long as I've known him, probably about 25 years, maybe 30. He's been painting for 30 years. And he's also become really good at producing series. Currently, he has a series on PBS called Canvassing the World, which he visits unique places, and then at the end of the series, or at the end of the show, he paints a painting that references to where he's at. So we don't always get a lot of Sean's work because he is very busy, but when we do get his work, it's beautiful. And I love the composition. Tell me a little bit about this.
Well, I think Sean has just nailed this painting. It really is very beautiful. It's a slightly looser style, I think, for Sean, because Sean can definitely be a real finish man in his painting. This one has a slightly looser feel about it. But I love the light. That's particularly catching on the horse's mane. I love the downhill trajectory of the horse and rider.
It's the opposite of what the original juxtaposition, right?
Yeah, it's just so well done. And regardless of whether or not I knew he was working off of a Dunton original, I think I would just look at that painting and just say, wow.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
He is one of our, well, along with all these others that we have covered, a really talented young man. We're honored to have him here. Then we're going to talk, we have two more people to cover. This is a young whippersnapper we've brought in. This is by Geo Richardson. He was inspired by the Cowpunchers. And Geo is in his late 20s. He's kind of starting out in his career, is doing very well. We're very excited about his future. But he took this painting and, boy, he really nailed it. He's also a person that's a cowboy. He's one of our few artists that really is a cowboy. He paints cows and horses and whatever, and ranching. He knows his stuff. So what do you like about this painting? It's called Still Out There.
Well, I like that GL has sort of seamlessly adapted it to his own style. It has that kind of that sort of spareness that GL's work has. He's working with large areas of color, to kind of create these, this sort of vast visual experience, has a very kind of easy to read sort of graphic quality. As a result, it also has this kind of like emotional quality about it too. His painting style in general, kind of does that. It can be sometimes a little bit melancholy, and the West can be lonely.
He definitely captures space there, doesn't he?
Yes, and even though there are two riders on horseback here, two cowpunchers, I think you still get a sense of like, it's man versus the land in a way.
Beautifully done. Love that one too. We're going to move on to the last one, and there's more artists that we have, I think, coming with more works.
We're waiting on a few.
We're waiting still on a few. This one is called Blackfeet, and it was produced 1912 to 1918. They're not really sure of the date, but the artist that chose this is Remy Yang. Tell us a little bit about Remy Yang, and then describe what's going on in the painting. Remy
is an extremely upbeat painter. Her work has a jubilance about it. It's very color-driven, pattern-driven. It sort of teeters on the edge of abstraction and realism. There's a constant push and pull visually between the foreground and the background. She she really does some interesting things with paint to create texture and visual intrigue in the work. Remy herself, she is Korean, born and raised in Japan, but she is ethnically Korean. She moved to the States, I believe, about 35, maybe 40 years ago, even. Remy has sort of changed this composition in that she's included a much more stylized horse, more typical of a horse we would see in her own personal work, and she's inserted a figure on this horse that would be more representational of her own personal work as well. She is very much influenced by her Korean and Japanese background, so we do see elements of her culture coming through, but the palette is very much changed. It still has an incredible sense of light, and it has that sort of uphill trajectory. So she took elements from Dunton's original composition and honored them in her piece, but really, I think, owned this painting as well.
It's very, very whimsical, very typical of her style. I love it too. And her paintings are full of paint. There's a lot of material in those paintings too. So it's wonderful to see all these different styles. And, Denise, thank you for putting these shows together. I think historically they're important. And it's good for all of us to remember, all these artists get inspired from other artists. And especially the Taos founders have had such an influence on the entire art market of Santa Fe, Taos, to this day. They captured the romanticism of the West through Taos, and it's wonderful to see our artists participating and interpreting, but also pushing themselves. And thank you for doing that. That was a great idea.
Yeah, well, thank you for accepting it and embracing it. Ironically, there is a Dunton exhibition at the Harwood Museum up in Taos right now, which I still need to get up to see. Maybe we'll do that together.
Yeah, we should one of these days.
Before it comes down, I think we only have till June. So,
okay.
But I know one of our artists, Catherine Stedham. I believe she went up there to see the exhibition when it first opened, and definitely got some inspiration from that show. And like you said, we are waiting on a couple more pieces from a few of the artists. We're waiting on a painting from Hiram Joe and from Brad Overton. They should be here any day now. Also, Bryce Pettit, who has done another bronze relief for the show. So we're just waiting for that piece to arrive as well. Yeah, that last bronze
relief he did was fantastic.
It really was, yes. So he's the only sculptor that has participated in these shows, and it's been a real welcome addition.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming in today. I'd like to encourage our audience to subscribe to our podcast. You can find us on YouTube or any of the platforms that host podcasts. You can go to BlueRainGallery.com and find the podcast there under our menu bar podcast. Also like to encourage everybody to go to our shop, our Blue Rain Gallery store, BlueRainPrintShop.com, and bring art into your everyday life. Thank you, Denise.
Thank you, Leroy. This was fun.